Thank you so much, Mark. Really grateful for that introduction. And shall I find the right position? And may I say Assalamu alaikum, may I say Namaste, may I say Guten Tag, and Sat Sri Akal, and Shalom, and all the others which I don't know about. But anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here with you and share some of our work that we do in High Wycombe. High Wycombe is a town I'll talk about shortly, which is about 30 miles sort of northwest of here. Another way of putting it is, in fact, which will probably give you a better geographic anchor, is if I say it's exactly halfway between London and Oxford. So you will know where we are roughly. My topic is, in some ways you can argue it's a very serious topic. It's countering radicalisation. And but nevertheless, it's a very important topic. In some ways, it's arguable to say that, unfortunately, we would rather that it wasn't that important. But that's the way it is. We have to accept it as the reality as it is. So therefore, I am following on from the act. It's hard to follow the act that we've just had from Margaret and Zini, of course, with the music and the way that she got participation audience. It was wonderful. And that encouraged me to think that I could start off with sharing a little joke with you so that you can all become involved with a bit of a laughter, and hopefully it will make sense to you. It will share that sense of humor about, do you know Reverend Desmond Tutu in South Africa? Yeah, everybody's heard of Desmond Tutu? Yeah, very famous Archbishop, of course, international figure of huge fame. And do you know, during the apartheid era, we had somebody called Pick Botha. He was the prime minister. And do you remember did you have any, some of you are too young to know from your own memory, but if you've done some history or can recollect, that his distinctive attire was wearing a bowler hat. Pick Botha always had a bowler hat on top of his head. So Pick Botha and Archbishop Reverend Tutu won a bit of a private moment amongst themselves. And they float away on a boat, on a river, etc. And Desmond Tutu is saying to Pick Botha, in this day and age, in this country, the press never gives us any positive coverage at all. They're always saying negative things, always saying unhelpful things and looking for negativities and so on. Whilst Bishop Tutu is saying this to Pick Botha, there was strong wind blowing, and Pick Botha's hat gets blown away and gets under water. And for him, for Pick Botha, this was the end of the world, because this was the entire image, his whole persona was identified with having, a bit like our brother here, with having his cap, his Turkish cap. His bowler hat was part of his personality, and he couldn't imagine himself not being without it, etc. But Archbishop Tutu says, brother, don't worry, I'll go and get it for you. So he gets up from his boat and starts walking on water, and gets up to the bowler hat, brings it back onto the boat again, and here you are. And of course, the greatly relieved Prime Minister is hugely grateful to Reverend Tutu and says, thank you so much indeed. And you know what the headlines were in the papers the following day? The headlines read, Desmond Tutu can't swim. So remember that the underlying philosophy behind that joke, if you like, there is a bit of an underlying philosophy which, keeping in the background, may be helpful to understand some of the things that I'm going to talk about in my topic, which is countering radicalisation through interfaith work. And then I'll give an example of how we do some partnership work within the Commonwealth. It will make good sense to illustrate some of the work that we do in a partnership setting with the Christian community in Pakistan. Now, so what I intend to do is, in the next 40 minutes or so, say very quickly what radicalization is, just in case people haven't come across this kind of language before in any big way, and say some of the sort of causes or reasons why radicalization happens, and then the signs of radicalization. How do we recognize it? How do we spot it? How do we see it when it's happening somewhere? Possibility. And then I'll come to the core, the meat of my presentation, which is to talk about the work that we do in interfaith terms through the Council for Christian and Muslim Relations in High Wycombe. This is an ancient town in Doomsday, appears in Doomsday Book, which means it goes back hundreds of years, maybe 1,000+ years, etc. So a smallish town, about 175,000 people, but historically very significant in this country. And then I'll say a word or two about our links with Pakistan, and I'd like to end up with a couple of key messages that I would like to sort of leave with you as my final parting thoughts. So what is radicalization? Can I take it that I know you've come from different parts of the world. To us in this country and in many other parts of the world, this kind of lexicon, this kind of language now is very common. It's in the press, in the media, in discussions and so on. And it's, although the literal meaning of radicalization or being radical, if you go back pre-9/11 sort of days, etc., even had positive connotations. If you, particularly, so for example, when you study at university and you develop some radical thoughts, it's meant to be a good thing, that you're thinking of things independently and so on. But the word now has been much more closely tied up with a sort of extremism forms of behavior which we regard as rather extreme and lead to or can lead to terrorism, bad behavior and that kind of thing. So nowadays, when you talk about radicalization, almost it's understood that you're talking about mainly religious radicalization, although it's not exclusively. When you analyze it and break it down, you will be explained that no, we mean radicalization in terms of, for example, animal welfare or far-right groups and so on, that kind of thing, or far-left groups, so radicalization. But currently, particularly in the post-9/11, 7/7 world, you all know about 9/11 in New York, the Twin Towers, etc., in 2001, which were followed by in 2005, on the 7th of July, with the London bombings, the underground and the buses and so on. So to us, therefore, 9/11, 7/7 go hand in hand together. And since then, we in various parts of the world are, of course, very seriously involved with the whole work of ensuring that this kind of, the impact of this kind of radicalized terrorist behavior doesn't tear our communities apart when we are living together in a multiracial, closely tied up, multi-faith work, if you like, a commonwealth of nations within towns, within cities, within countries. So that's the topic. That's the sort of, and how do we radicalize? How do we counter this sort of thing? And why it was relevant to us in High Wycombe, I'll come to that, of course, in a moment. Now, what about the second part? What I said, well, what are the sort of reasons behind or causes of radicalization? And there isn't an exact cause. All the academic research, all the people who think about these things and write about these things have not really come up with any type of logic or correlation between an individual person who's engaged in this form of thinking and behavior and what might have caused. So there isn't a single cause. It can vary. And it is because there isn't that sort of single correlation or relationship between one cause and an individual, etc. There's often a fear that it can happen to anybody. And particularly, although I would argue that it can't happen to anybody or everybody, it's a very rare phenomenon. It happens to only a tiny number of people, thankfully. But the perception, however, in the public mind, and this is where the media, my joke about the media, you see, becoming relevant. The reason why only a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people create an impression as if the whole religion or whole faith group is totally involved in this kind of thinking and behavior. It's because of the way the media works on these sorts of stories. And that's, I mean, in terms of for example, the world population, I think the figure is around 2 billion Muslims in the world. If we take Muslims, I'm a Muslim, my middle name is Muhammad. There are 2 billion Muslims, give or take, 1 or 2, in the world. And how many incidents of terrorism can we count on the fingers of our hands and so on? Yeah, a handful. But in the public mind, and the consequences that people like me and my brother Sadat and other Muslims and brother Ramzi, who are Muslims, have to face, as if all of us are terrorists because we are Muslims, etc. That's the power of media, and we always have to watch that. So, however, having said that, there are some clues that we have about what sorts of people are, if they're going to be involved, what sort of people will get influenced by radicalization processes. They tend to be younger, on the whole. They tend to be younger, teenage upwards, sort of 13 plus, if you like. They tend to be that sort of age. They often experience identity or some form of personal crisis, whatever the reasons behind that might be for that individual, but they will have some form of an identity crisis of what sociologists sometimes call alienation or disaffection. The other group of people who are also vulnerable are those with a very strong sense of injustice about anything. And if they can particularly relate it to what's going on around the world, if some tragedy happens or some incident or dispute is being played out on the world stage between people or between countries, and it's an asymmetrical struggle, by which I mean one side is too powerful and the other one is rather very weak, but the very powerful side is, if you like, really taking a ride on the weaker one. It can sometimes cause what psychologists call a cognitive opening, which means in the mind, you see that incident and something sort of occurs to you, something happens to you, which gives you a very strong sense of injustice. And you start to think about what are you going to do about it. There's also a theory about from zero to hero. There are people who, in other circumstances, in other ways, are not necessarily all that well accomplished in life, but they do have a very strong sense of adventure or excitement and want to do something. And if they also happen to suffer from or embrace some of the other characteristics that I've talked about, some demagogue, some kind of online activity somewhere, some sort of person who is out to get those sort of people can find it easy to capture them, particularly through internet and social media. A belief that religion or culture is under threat, then that I think we were talking about culture earlier on. Culture is a very, very dominant influence on people, and we're all very, most of the times, of course, we learn to grow up to live with mutual harmony and respect, but as long as nobody is threatening us in ways in which goes to the very heart of who we are and what we represent as people and so on. Individuals who feel socially isolated and possibly suffering from depression is another group, and also, according to some of the evidence, people with criminal pattern or history of criminal behavior. And I think this is particularly relevant, a point worth bearing in mind, and you can recall, if you are able to recall, or when you see anything that may happen in the future, just try and think who were the people who were behind it. Say, for example, the Paris incident recently, or the Tunisian incident, or the one in London in Woolwich Barracks where Lee Rigby, the drummer, was hacked in public sight, in the streets, etc. my own town, of course, the incident that I'll speak to you later on, involved what we call people who are called reverts, who are not Muslims to begin with, but they become Muslims later on in life, actually. So there is, and if you look at every time something like that happens with people who have become Muslims afterwards, who weren't born Muslims, you look at their history and the background, and it's always full of criminal activity, drug taking, drinking, and that kind of activity. So moving on, so that I make sure I try and finish it within time, moving on. What about the various signs of the sort of vulnerable people who might get caught up in that kind of behavior? And these are being that sociologists and other people or social scientists who have done some work in these sorts of areas indicate that people who are overly secretive about their online viewing, those who display feelings of isolation or express themselves in terms of them and us, as if they're different. Becoming more argumentative. Suddenly, if you were not so argumentative before, but you become argumentative and domineering, and you just want to impose your point of view on others, and if others try and do or disagree with you, you take on a position of condemning them outright straight away, that kind of attitude. Social isolation is another possible sign where you start to lose interest in activities that you used to enjoy, but now you are distancing themselves from those activities and from your social groups. Appearance is another one. Suddenly, if you're clean-shaven once, for example, but suddenly you start wearing a different dress and start wearing a beard and a particular type of hat and so on and so forth. With very honourable exceptions, of course, with very honourable exceptions. Okay. So I hope that gives you an idea. Brother Ramsey and I work on the body that I chair, in fact, the Council for Christian-Muslim Relations. So he's perfectly safe. You don't have to worry about him. Okay, I hope that gives you a bit of a background to be able to then appreciate the significance of why I thought it would be worth sharing our case study in High Wycombe with you. High Wycombe, as I said, is a town of about, the township itself is about 90,000 people, but it's within a district of 175,000 people. And let me read a short paragraph, a statement from the former Member of Parliament of High Wycombe, who described High Wycombe in these terms in the context of our work through the CCMR. If I can sort of abbreviate it, CCMR standing for Council for Christian and Muslim Relations. He says, and writing about it, says, Wycombe's religious balance is unique in southern England. It is unusual in that local religious affiliations are largely either Christian or Muslim. In an age of tension between and within religions, our town thus has a unique opportunity to establish a pattern of good relations between these two great faiths. The Council for Christian and Muslim Relations is taking a leading role in making that opportunity happen, building understanding, respect, cooperation, and shared values, as well as working for the common good. Please join it and support its work for a better future. Okay, so that gives me, if you like, a way into saying something about the town and why it is important, why it became important in the context of interfaith work. Now, most of you would have flown in. I guess you would have had to get onto a plane in order to arrive here for this conference. And if you tried to bring a bottle of water or a bottle of Coke or any other sort of liquid, which was more than a couple of drops, I think you would have been stopped at the airport and say you can't do that. Yeah, and now That dates back to 2006. It was in August 2006 when that particular rule was brought in. And the reason why it brought in was what happened in my town, in my city, High Wycombe, in August 2006. So you can hold me. Every time you're traveling and you're thirsty, you're craving for some water, and you can't have it, you can blame us in High Wycombe for that. The reason why the ban was brought in was because the plot that was being hatched, not only in High Wycombe, but there was a group of people whose leader came from High Wycombe. There was a group of people who were hatching a plot to blow up 4 aeroplanes, transatlantic flights, going from London to various destinations in the United States. And the plot was to, in fact, almost sort of synchronize the timing so that they will be mid-Atlantic, they will all be blown up to pieces. Absolutely terrible, most horrible incident of terrorism that you can imagine. That was the plot, and the way they were going to do it was they had been working on it, obviously to the sort of explosives that they will use. They were going to use, I think it was primarily Coca-Cola bottles. So they will empty the Coca-Cola bottles and pierce a little hole at the bottom and put some explosives in the bottle, and then, of course, reseal it. And then they will board their flights with those explosive bottles, which are ostensibly looking like Coca-Cola, but are in fact lethal explosive stuff. And that's what they were going to do. The other places which are involved in this were Birmingham and Walthamstow, which is another part of London here, East London. The leader of the chap, Asad Sarwar, came from High Wycombe proper, and another guy, Brian Young, who was a Christian who had become Muslim from a town called Aylesbury, but had moved to High Wycombe recently at the time. Okay. So that was the plot, which fortunately our security services, intelligence services, were able to thwart, intercept in time, and of course then kill it off in the bud. What happened as a result of that, the Metropolitan Police, which is the London Police, then carried out raids in High Wycombe, dawn raids, and sealed off a huge part of the town for 3 months. So for 3 months now, our town was going to be under investigation with huge number of police going around various parts of the town, dislodging people from their homes, asking them to go somewhere else, barricading roads, emptying houses, going into people's houses, carrying out investigations in the woods, in the streets, everywhere, and so on. Now, can you imagine what would happen to a close-knit community with all of a sudden, if you've got hundreds and hundreds of police officers, with all the apparatus, all the equipment that goes with carrying out a very serious investigation of that kind? And what sort of impact would that have on a community? You can imagine it will be very scary. It will be extremely scary. People were very scared. People were very worried. People were very afraid of what was going to come out of this. And the reason why, there was a good reason why people were afraid all round. I mean, but particularly everybody was afraid and worried, of course, as to this sort of problem coming to your own doorstep. You hear about these things in the news or read them in the newspapers, that's one thing. But when you think it's come to your own doorstep, it really, I assure you, it is a very, very different feeling. It's absolutely awful. And as I said, there were good reasons why people were extremely afraid and worried, because we knew from our past experience, we knew from experience of these sorts of incidents happening from around the world, including the 9/11, the biggest one of the lot, if you like, that when this sort of thing happens, there's always a certain amount of backlash. There's always a certain amount of backlash, which is a kickback of people from other communities, affected communities, start to then behaving badly towards Muslims indiscriminately. And it was really that fear that drove a lot of people into a siege mentality. So people were housebound, people weren't coming out. So 3 days into the Metropolitan Police raids into High Wycombe, 3 days, I think it was about 3 or 4 days into this, is when something happened which I referred to as the Abyssinian moment. Now, it's a grand old comparison. It's a very big comparison, but that's a comparison that I've used and to good effect, that makes good sense to people, they appreciate it. And the Abyssinian, those of you who may have some knowledge of Islamic history would know that in the early days of Islam, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, declared his prophecy, and only a small number of people had converted to Islam at the time, there was an enormous amount of backlash at the time from the old vested interests in Arabia at the time, because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were telling him things like you've got to treat everybody equally, that you can't bury your young female borns alive, that you can't take slaves into your home. And you see, he was saying those sorts of things which people at the time in Arabia found rather unacceptable, because they were used to doing things over the centuries in a different way. So they reacted to that negatively and were inflicting all kinds of harm. And there came a time of crisis when 72 people of the early followers of Islam, the Prophet advised them to go to Abyssinia, what we now call Ethiopia, where there was King Negus, who was the Christian king. And when they went there, and they sought refuge, talking about refugees nowadays, yeah, sought refuge, the landlords, the big powerful people in Mecca, Arabia at the time, the ruling group, didn't like that. They wanted them back, coming back to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca. So they went after them, to King Negus to plead with them, and they had very strong relationship with King Negus, and they pleaded with him to send these people back. And to cut a long story short, once King Negus listened to why these people had sought refuge in his country, he drew a line in the sand, in the floor, and he said, well, the difference between you and I, and our religion and your religion, is no bigger than this line. And over my dead body will I send these people back. And they said to them, you are free to live in my country for as long as you like. Okay? That's the sort of historic example of Abyssinian. And I use that Abyssinian moment analogy in this context because the Reverend David Pickin, who was the vicar at our All Saints Church in High Wycombe, on the 3rd or 4th day of this incident of Metropolitan Police, telephoned me. I was a lucky one. In one sense, you could argue that the gods, those of us who are people of faith, would sort of think in those terms. There was God's design that he would choose somebody to play a particular role in these circumstances. So Reverend David Pickin telephoned me, with whom I had no previous sort of serious experience of working, but he must have done some research as to who's who in the town. He had only recently moved into the town, in effect. But he would have done that, and he picked up the phone to me and said, Shafique, we know what's happening at the moment. You must be worried. But please, the reason why I'm ringing you is because I would like to say to you that we are all together with you and your Muslim community. Don't feel alone. Okay? Tell me what we should do to make your community feel better. You can see why I call it a small sort of scale Abyssinian moment. And that is what led to, at the moment, well, I said, David, to be honest, thank you so much, but I don't know what's happening out there either, to be honest, and I think that most of the people are still stunned, disappointed and stunned and numbed with this impact and fallout. But give me a few days and I will let you know and be in touch. And after a few days, I got in touch with him and I said, well, there is an enormous amount of worry and concern, but I honestly don't know what we should do because I don't know what's going to come of this. So we decided, however, that we should get together, however, wouldn't it be a good idea just to sit around and just think through some of the things, reflect on what's happening and try and prepare ourselves. And prepare ourselves is a good idea. So we decided to do that and met in this All Saints Church in High Wycombe. And by sheer coincidence, sort of jury of 12, if you've seen that film, by sheer coincidence, there were 6 Muslims and 6 Christians present in this first gathering. when we then talked about what was happening in the town and what should we do and so on and so forth. And it was, that meeting was the start of the process of thinking through all the sort of challenges, all the sorts of different ways in which we might, all the scenarios that we might have to face, and how the different ways in which we have to prepare ourselves when push comes to a shove, if it's a worst case scenario, how we will actually come out and face the challenges and so on. And we met once and we met twice and so on, and we decided that this was the sort of gathering that was helping us to form relationships, to form understandings, which will stand us in good stead to be able to cope with, where we then tackle all that we might be facing shortly. So that was then the basis on which the Council for Christian and Muslim Relations was born in 2006 and was launched in 2007. And I was asked to be the founding chair of that, and I still continue to perform that role. And since then, one of the first things, by the way, we did was we issued, once we formed that, issued a press release to that effect, which the local press actually published in a more fairly prominent kind of way, and that gave us a very good start. That gave us a very good start, seeing a statement coming from prominent Muslim and Christian leaders in the town and other well-known people in the town, together jointly issuing a statement of solidarity, of unity, made an enormous difference already to the people, to the psychology of the town. But since then... Sorry?
What you are trying to inform us, they have already released the pack all around
Yeah, when you finish, we'll ask a question then. Yeah, sure. What I'd like to do now at this point is, in effect, then come to the core bit of my topic, which was countering radicalization through interfaith work. And through our last 10 years' experience, I'm going to try and identify about 5 or 6 ways in which we have found interfaith work to be a very effective, powerful tool enabling us to work together towards anti-radicalization. Now, the first way in which we first benefit would be along the lines of the local interfaith groups play a role in building relationships and friendships across faiths and create a safe space for people to ask questions and creating the conditions for dialogue rather than monologue. Okay? So the ability to be able to talk and ask questions freely was of enormous importance. And we've carried that work on. Examples of the work that we've carried on in that kind of way is our work in schools, where in effect Dr. Ramsey has been very active recently, whereby to different schools in High Wycombe, both primary as well as secondary schools, one imam and one priest go by arrangement, prior arrangement, with a particular school and speak to the assembly of that school, young children, together, imam and priest, together, sharing the platform, saying those positive things about their religions from each point of view, and demonstrating the similarity and the overlaps, and showing how we live and respect each other together and so on. It has an enormous impact on young people. Secondly, when people of different faiths come together to discuss their values, this helps to find commonalities as well as differences. And over time, this process generates a shared vision for the participating community and wider society, which in turn helps to make common cause together. Now, I can give you several examples of that, but I'll just mention 1 or 2 very quickly. We in High Wycombe, like I think in other towns as well, and you may be familiar in your countries where you come from if you've got a fair number of Muslims living in that, every year we celebrate what we call Eid Milad-ul-Nabi, which is the birthday of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And in High Wycombe, we've been doing that for many, many years. is a huge number of people, about 30,000, 25 to 30,000 population, Muslim population in High Wycombe, but good few thousand of those turn out on this day of procession, starting from a particular central mosque, going all the way around various streets of the town, and go through High Street, where All Saints Church is situated. And when we reach that point of All Saints Church, which is the partner institution in this Council for Christian and Muslim Relations, where David Picken was based as well, followed now by Reverend Hugh Ellis, who is the current priest there. Our Christian brothers and sisters come out to receive the congregation, this procession. They receive it in the streets, they make speeches with the Muslim religious leaders, and then walk with us for quite a sizable period of time by way of showing solidarity. Now, I have challenged many people over the years to say if in their experience they know of any other place where this kind of thing happens. And I've not yet been corrected. If you are aware of any, or if you come across it somewhere, I'd like to know. But this is one of the sort of flagship examples of solidarity and unity and interfaith unity and cohesion that I often mention by way of the work and the achievement of CCMR. Thirdly, through our activities such as religious literacy work in schools, talks and seminars, interfaith work helps to promote deeper understanding and raise awareness. And I've already mentioned the work in our schools that we do, including with the help and support of Dr. Ramsey. We also do project work with the university, Interfaith Week in the university. And a particular interest initiative is what we call the Human Library. Human Library is where we advertise the initiative so people can come from all walks of life, from all religious, different social, cultural backgrounds, and you can choose to say that whoever you are, that you would like to talk to a Muslim, to a Christian, to a Buddhist, to a Hindu, to an atheist, or whoever. And you go and pick them, and they become your human book. And they go and sit with you for 20 minutes, half an hour, and you find out and ask them questions. It's a human library concept, very, very helpful. Another very important dimension is for people of faith to be seen together. This sends a powerful message and can challenge misconceptions by giving joint statements and sharing platforms. And we have done this in High Wycombe. Again, another very unique example, if you can say very unique example, you get sort of example again where I am not aware of anything like this happening anywhere else in the world as a result of our work through the CCMR, where it links up with my sort of shorter bit that I'm going to talk about, is the link with Pakistan. About 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, coming up to 4 years in December, 4 years ago, a place called Peshawar in Pakistan. It's a huge city in Peshawar in northwest frontier region, where they, by sheer coincidence, have a church called All Saints Church, which is the same church as the church in High Wycombe, All Saints Church, where they had a terrorist incident. I'm running out of time? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, 10 minutes. I'll be quick, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay, there was a terrorist incident, a massive terrorist incident with a huge amount of casualties on a Sunday afternoon when the Christian community in Peshawar was doing their Sunday service. As a result of which, in High Wycombe, we took up the cudgels and we did lots of things, but amongst those things, one thing that we are really very, very proud of, if you can be proud of anything in these circumstances, is that we decided to have a shared prayer service, one in the mosque on a Friday afternoon and one on Sunday morning in the church, where both the Christian religious leaders and the Muslim religious leaders will share the sermons and share the platform and share the prayers. And we were able to do that with a huge number of our Christian brothers and sisters in their robes, absolutely resplendent, coming, not only being present in the mosque, Brother Ramsey, not only being present, but actually, to even my surprise, to our surprise, they decided to actually do the whole prayer with us, with complete prostrations and body movements and so on. Amazing spectacle, if you can imagine something like that. We're very proud of that. Okay, I know that we're running short of time. I'm going to cut out one or two things. But in my mayor year. I was mayor of High Wycombe in 2012, 2013, which took me to Germany, by the way, also Kelkheim, where we're twinned with a city called Kelkheim near Frankfurt. In my mayor year, people who come from all over the world, and of course I as mayor would receive them, talk to them about the life and work of our city and town and so on. And one of the things that we will mention is the work of the interfaith community and how Muslims, Christians, others, etc., live very peaceably in this town. And once we're faced with particular challenges, how we deal with them. Invariably, all our visitors and guests from all around the world used to get extremely impressed with what they would hear, and often would wish if they could repeat that kind of thing in their own countries, etc. It was in that sort of context that I had representatives from the Christian community in Pakistan who came visit us, and when I told them about this, they said, could we form a partnership so that we could work together with the Christians? You are Muslims as a minority in a Christian country, predominantly Christian country. We are Christians minority in a predominantly Muslim country. Together, if we join forces, we can actually be mutual support to each other, share our experiences, and go forward together. It made good sense, and we have since been working on that project very successfully. My final two key messages, very quickly, very importantly. To me, I think if I was to one message for our non-Muslim, if you like, brothers and sisters, the wider society, that is not to demonize a whole community. For God's sake. One of the worst possible mistakes that you can make and be a recruiting sergeant for people like ISIS is when you take on a whole religious group and put them on probation on the dock because one Muslim somewhere has done something stupid. Think of Donald Trump, for example, the sort of things that he has gone on to say recently. In fact, he has been dubbed as possibly the best source of recruitment for ISIS since his statement. So please treat every individual as an individual and what they do as a criminal behavior and deal with them according to the law. And one message for the Muslims is that, and this is very important, for the Muslim community to integrate with the wider community more positively and follow an enlightened version of Islam. And here I'm going to run out of time unless I'll be given more time through Q&A. Again, there was particular examples I was going to share with you, which is very relevant to us in High Wycombe at the moment, which is the assassination of a governor in Punjab by one of his guardsmen, Mumtaz Qadri, as a result of which there's difference of opinion whether he should be treated as a hero, having sort of followed a line of blasphemy laws, or whether he should be convicted as a murderer. And Pakistan decided to convict him as a murderer, but there were sort of viewpoints and opinions the other way, which are causing us some difficulty locally. And I would like to think that we living in this country should be able to follow a more sensible path and live on the basis of values, a basis of concepts which will make sense to our neighbors, our other brothers and sisters, our fellow citizens. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, excellent Professor Chouldry, for an excellent and informative speech. We got some question, of course. Is there any questions? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chouldry, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you so much, ICD, for giving us this wonderful forum. My name is Karimullah. I'm coming from Afghanistan. I work in Sudan. I just want to add here, it's not a question. Whatever we see actually around, like what happened in the US, 9/11, or in London, or elsewhere in the world, it's not the work of one individual. One individual can never actually plan something big accident like this. I mean, my father is killed in Russian war. My uncle is killed in Russian war. My third uncle was taken in. We have no news till today. But never, I mean, people living in my community, we thought of retaliation, or we reacted differently to Russians. So it's not that. I think it's an international criminal organization. They are using some people. they're using kind of drugs to use these people, as you said, like underage, 13, 14, 15 years old people. But it never, I mean, Afghanistan during the whole Russian war, there was no suicide. But now today we see Muslims, they're blowing up the masjid. They're blowing up, I mean, on a daily basis in Afghanistan, in different provinces. You see, you go to the news, say a masjid was blown up by the terrorists. So now who is this terrorist? If his religion is Islam, so how come he can blow up a masjid? How come he blew up a school, killing 300 people in one day? So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I just wanted to
Thank you so much.
We'll take one more question.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, so at the
There's
back.
some questions.
Well, Mr. Chouldry, this is a good presentation, but the only thing is, one thing is, from my point of view and from my experience, I'm sure my experience is much smaller than your experience. But as far as I know, the media make all these all the hate crimes or whatever this the brainwash, all these things, as you mentioned, that all these ones are become by the medias, not by the government medias. Because if you see that on the after the Iraq war, whatever the BBC was, I mean, forecast the British soldier, the Abu Ghraib prison, which is whatever the soldiers do against the Muslim people in Iraq. So that's all the big negative, the break to the mind of those young people which age of 15 and 16.
Yep.
So, and because of nobody's here to ask that question. So I mean, why the media, number one, is responsible for those actions they do, and the second one, the government themselves, which is they got the illegal war in over there. They are responsible for all these things, whatever that happened, Wycombe, whatever, across the countries.
Thank you for that. I mean, that can be a debate for another couple of hours, to be honest, and you're absolutely right, of course. But let me just say very briefly on this, because it's a very important point. We often offer this as almost a justification, if you like, for an explanation for why these things happen. Now, and in one way, it is an explanation, if you like, or justification is a harder word to use, but an explanation to understand why these things happen. But I think what my message has been, my message here is to integrate better for the Muslim community, to understand the society in which you live gives you different ways in which you can actually try and make a difference, okay? By adopting the method of extremism and terrorism and violence, you're in effect producing after effects which are going to make your position even harder and more difficult than it already is. So the sensible way to do is to discharge your responsibilities as a good citizen of the country that you're living in, follow the good principles. I mean, the example that is worth remembering, you know when the Berlin Wall came down? You know when the Berlin Wall came down? There wasn't a single violent act. What did people do? They made a human chain in their thousands, in there wearing white robes and burning candles for a few nights. And the attention and the focus of the whole of world media, attention on those people was asking the question, well, what's wrong with these people asking this question, that we want freedom, that we want to live in one united Germany? Yeah? By raising the question. So you've got to learn to behave in ways in which you win friends and make alliances, not enemies. That's what I'm saying. The explanations can be long and varied, I agree with you, but it's what we do as individuals, as groups of people, in which we work positively to achieve good results, better results all around.
I just thank you for what you said, and especially the examples you gave about High Wycombe. I would say that what the not non-Muslim, but the indigenous people can do, the people of this country can do, is be more maybe more embracing, more understanding of the isolated or you know, the people who are not isolated. What are they? They're out of the loop. But also, I think it's important at the same time that the models that you showed about Imam and the priest working together, we should have the young people of these communities working together, because once they get to know one another, they're no longer this or the other. They would love each other. They would see the good in each other. But really, I feel one other thing I would say is the Christians must embrace more, but also I feel the moderate and reasonable Muslims like yourselves, like good people like you, we should maybe be more vocal in saying what is happening is bad, not saying they're not Muslim, because it doesn't help anyone. But if I take responsibility, I say, I'm so sorry, it's our children that's doing this, and we have to do something about it. That is so powerful, And what you do about it is get your children to know the other children, It's many things, there's many things to do. But to take responsibility is one of the most important actions. In fact, the cultural diplomacy at work, like, for example, they opened the mosques to invite people. They opened for iftar, etc. like that. It's very good. That's very good. You go and see how wonderful it is to eat together, to praise God together, etc. Whatever it is, this is what's needed. Cultural diplomacy on both sides. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yes. No, I agree with that. I agree with that, yes. Thank you for that.
Excellent, Mr. Chouldry. Professor Chouldry, thank you. And please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together for Mr. Chouldry.